February 9th, 1942. 2:30 in the afternoon. A single spark leaps from a welder's torch inside a former first-class lounge on the most magnificent ocean liner ever built. The spark lands on a pile of life vests stuffed with kapok, one of the most flammable materials on Earth. Within seconds, fire races through varnished mahogany paneling, through silk draperies, through Art Deco masterpieces that took France's greatest artists years to create. By nightfall, water from fire hoses has flooded the ship's starboard compartments. The vessel begins to list. At 2:45 in the morning, with firefighters still scrambling across her decks, the SS Normandie rolls onto her port side and crashes into the frozen mud of the Hudson River. 1,029 feet of floating palace, the largest and fastest ocean liner on Earth, now lies capsized at Pier 88, her three massive funnels pointing sideways toward the Manhattan skyline. She had carried Marlene Dietrich and Ernest Hemingway, Walt Disney and Salvador Dali. She held the blue ribbon for the fastest Atlantic crossing and dined her guests in a room longer than the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. Her construction cost $60 million during the Great Depression. Her interiors were designed by René Lalique himself. 7 years of glory, 1 afternoon of fire, 1 night of incompetence, gone. This is the story of a Russian émigré who revolutionized ship design, a nation that bet its prestige on floating perfection, and a wartime conversion so rushed and careless that it destroyed what Hitler's U-boats never could. This isn't just about a ship. This is about what happens when speed defeats safety, when bureaucracy ignores expertise, when the greatest achievement of an era burns because someone stored life vests next to a blowtorch. Welcome inside the SS Normandie, where France's floating dream was built, celebrated, and destroyed. Paris, 1920. A Russian émigré stands at a lathe in the Renault car factory, turning metal parts for pennies. His hands are calloused, his clothes are worn. His name is Vladimir Ivanovich Yurkevich, and 3 years ago he designed battleships for the Tsar. Before the revolution destroyed everything, Yurkevich was one of the most promising naval engineers in the Russian Empire. Born in Moscow in 1885, educated at the St. Petersburg Polytechnic Institute under the legendary Alexei Krylov. Graduated from Kronstadt Naval School as a shipbuilding engineer, commissioned as second lieutenant in the Imperial Russian Navy. Assigned to the design bureau of the Baltic shipyard, where he worked on the dreadnought Sevastopol, a warship so advanced that experts considered it years ahead of anything else afloat. Then came 1917. The Bolsheviks. The collapse. Yurkevich fled with the white Russian forces, escaped through Turkey, and washed up in Paris with nothing but the clothes on his back and a head full of hull designs that no one wanted. For 6 months, he works as a manual laborer, turns metal, sweeps floors, lives in primitive conditions where his drawing board becomes the only sacred object he owns. At night, he sketches, refines, perfects theories he developed in Russia, revolutionary concepts about hydrodynamics, about how a ship's hull should interact with water. He imagines vessels with slim, pear-shaped cross-sections, clipper-style bows that slice through waves, bulbous forefeet beneath the waterline that reduce resistance and increase efficiency. He approaches British shipbuilders with these ideas. They're planning a massive new liner called the Queen Mary. Yurkevich shows them his designs, explains how his hull could boost their ship's effective power by 1/6. They laugh. The bow is too radical, they say, too unconventional. They reject him completely. 6 more years pass. Yorkovich claws his way up from factory floor to shipyard draftsman. He never stops believing, never stops refining. And in 1928, opportunity finally arrives. The shipbuilding company Penhoet at Saint-Nazaire hires him based on his qualifications. Soon after, the Compagnie Générale Transatlantique, the French line, approaches Penhoet with an impossible commission. Build the largest, fastest, most luxurious ocean liner in history. A ship to represent France against British and German rivals. A floating declaration of national superiority. Yorkovich works through nights, designing the hull independently. His model is tested against 25 others in Paris and Hamburg. The results stun everyone. His design is the fastest, the most fuel-efficient, the most revolutionary. By 1929, construction begins on what will become the SS Normandie. The clipper bow, the bulbous forefoot, the hydrodynamic hull that will slice through Atlantic swells with almost no resistance. Every innovation rejected by the British, embraced by the French. A refugee who couldn't get anyone to listen is now creating the most advanced ship the world has ever seen. He doesn't know that in 13 years he will stand on a Manhattan pier, watching his masterpiece burn, begging authorities to let him aboard to save her. They will refuse, and she will die. But first, she must be built. The late 1920s. An arms race is unfolding across the Atlantic, but the weapons aren't guns. They're ocean liners. Germany dominates with the Bremen and Europa, sleek speedsters that have captured the blue riband. Italy boasts the Rex. Britain is planning a superliner called the Queen Mary. And France. France has never held the blue riband. Not once in the history of transatlantic competition. For a nation that considers itself the pinnacle of civilization, this is unacceptable. The Compagnie Générale Transatlantique makes a decision that will consume the next decade. Build the most extravagant ship ever constructed. Not just faster than the competition, not just larger, more beautiful, more innovative, more French. A floating advertisement for everything France represents. Art, cuisine, culture, engineering, excellence. The French government agrees to subsidize the project heavily. The final cost will reach 812 million francs, approximately $60 million. At the time, the most expensive ship ever built. January 26, 1931. Workers at Saint-Nazaire lay the keel of a vessel known only as T6, T for Transat, an alternate name for the French line, and 6 because she's their 6th major project. The shipyard has constructed an entirely new building way and dry dock just to accommodate her. Nothing this large has ever been attempted. While the Great Depression halts construction on Britain's Queen Mary, France presses forward. National pride demands it. Workers labor through economic catastrophe, building a monument to French ambition while the world economy collapses around them. October 29, 1932. 3 years to the day after the stock market crash that triggered the Depression. 200,000 spectators gather at Saint-Nazaire to witness the launch. The 27,567-ton hull slides into the Loire River, creating a wave so massive it washes over several hundred onlookers. No one is seriously injured. Madame Marguerite Lebrun, wife of French President Albert Lebrun, christens the vessel. The name, kept secret until this moment, is finally revealed. Normandie. The dimensions are staggering. 1,029 feet long, just short of the Eiffel Tower, laid on its side. 119 feet wide, 83,000 tons when fully fitted. She will be the first ship to exceed 60,000 tons, then 70,000, then 80,000. Capacity: 1,972 passengers, 1,345 crew. Power: 160,000 horsepower from turbo-electric propulsion, making her the most powerful steam turbo-electric passenger ship ever built. Top speed during trials: 32.125 knots. A floating city that can cross the Atlantic in 4 days. But the dimensions tell only half the story. The interiors are where France makes its declaration of supremacy. The French government insists Normandy must showcase French culture at its absolute peak. Architect Pier leads the design in Art Deco and streamlined modern style. The first-class dining room stretches 305 feet, longer than the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. 46 feet wide, 28 feet high. Passengers enter through doors adorned with 6-meter bronze medallions by Raymond Soubs. René Lalique creates 12 towering glass pillars and 38 matching columns, all illuminated from within. No natural light enters the room. The entire space glows with crystal. Normandy earns her nickname, the Ship of Light. The Grand Salon features massive glass murals by Jean Dupin. Jean Dunant creates monumental lacquer panels for the smoking room. The first-class swimming pool offers graduated depths. The theatre is the first ever installed on an ocean liner. The winter garden contains exotic birds in cages, tropical plants, and fountains. The children's dining room is decorated by Jean de Brunhoff with murals of Baba the elephant. 400 different first-class cabin designs. No two alike. Fitting out takes longer than expected. The depression reduces transatlantic demand. Initial sea trials reveal troubling vibrations from the 3-bladed propellers. They'll later be replaced with 4-bladed versions. But finally, in May 1935, Normandy is declared ready. She represents everything France hopes to project: elegance, innovation, superiority. Every panel, every crystal column, every bronze medallion proclaims that French civilization has no equal. But beauty alone won't win the blue riband. Speed will. And on May 29, 1935, Normandy will attempt what France has never achieved. 50,000 people gather at Le Havre to witness her departure. Below deck, silver medallions have already been minted, celebrating a victory not yet won. A 30-foot blue pennant waits to be unfurled. The French aren't hoping for the record. They're expecting it. May 29th, 1935. Le Havre, France. 50,000 people crowd the waterfront to witness history. The SS Normandie sits at her berth, 3 red funnels gleaming, hull freshly painted, ready for her maiden voyage. 1,007 passengers have boarded, 589 in first class, 293 in tourist, 121 in third. Captain René Pugnet stands on the bridge. The French line has officially refused to predict that Normandy will capture the blue riband. Publicly, they're modest. Privately, they've already minted silver medallions commemorating the victory stashed below deck, ready to distribute to passengers the moment they arrive in New York. A 30-foot blue pennant waits to be unfurled. They know what's coming. At the signal, Normandy eases from her berth and heads into the Atlantic. Yorkovich's hull performs exactly as designed. The clipper bow slices through swells with almost no resistance. The bulbous forefoot beneath the waterline cancels wave interference. Where conventional liners churn and struggle, Normandie glides. She averages 29.98 knots westbound, more than a full knot faster than any previous record. 4 days, 3 hours, 2 minutes after leaving France, she passes the Ambrose lightship off the coast of New York. The blue pennant rockets up her mainmast. Her steam whistles scream in triumph. France has the blue riband for the first time in history. 100,000 spectators line New York Harbor as she arrives. The city has never seen anything like her. On the return voyage eastbound, she averages over 30 knots, shattering records in both directions. The medallions are distributed. The celebration is complete. But the British aren't finished. August 1936. The RMS Queen Mary enters service and immediately captures the blue riband, averaging 30.14 knots. A fierce rivalry erupts. France responds with modifications, replacing 3-bladed propellers with 4-bladed versions, increasing Normandie's tonnage from 79,280 to 83,423 gross registered tons. She must remain the largest liner afloat even after Queen Mary's 81,235 tons enter the picture. July 1937. Normandie recaptures the blue riband. The pennant returns to French hands. Queen Mary takes it back. For good. Captain Pugnett sends a gracious telegram across the Atlantic. Bravo to the Queen Mary. Until next time. There will be no next time. War is coming. Despite the rivalry, despite the records, Normandie becomes the ship of choice for transatlantic royalty. Her passenger manifests red like a Hollywood premiere. Ernest Hemingway crosses aboard her. Marlene Dietrich, James Stewart, Walt Disney, Fred Astaire, Cary Grant, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., songwriters Noel Coward and Irving Berlin, conductor Arturo Toscanini, Salvador Dali, Bing Crosby, the Von Trapp family, later immortalized in The Sound of Music, sails from New York to Southampton in 1938. Young John F. Kennedy and his family cross multiple times. Adolphe Mouron-Cassandre's promotional poster becomes an Art Deco icon, reproduced for decades. Normandie isn't just a ship, she's a cultural phenomenon, yet she rarely exceeds 60% capacity. The very grandeur that makes her famous proves intimidating for ordinary travelers. Some passengers report that her overwhelming interiors cause headaches, claustrophobia, even seasickness aggravated by visual overload. Queen Mary's more restrained British style proves more commercially popular. Normandie covers her operating expenses, but never repays the construction loans that built her. The French government continues subsidizing operations. Beauty, it turns out, doesn't guarantee profit. August 28, 1939. Normandie completes her 139th westbound crossing and arrives at Pier 88 in New York Harbor. 4 days later, Germany invades Poland. World War II begins. The Atlantic, crossed so triumphantly for 4 years, is suddenly deadly with U-boats. The Compagnie Générale Transatlantique orders Normandie to remain in New York. She will not risk the crossing. She will wait for the war to end. She never sails again. For over a year, the most magnificent ocean liner afloat sits idle at a Manhattan pier, maintained by her French crew, waiting for a conflict that shows no signs of ending. Queen Mary arrives and docks nearby. The two great rivals rest side by side, going nowhere. And then France falls. The Vichy government collaborates with Hitler. Normandy suddenly belongs to the enemy, and the United States must decide what to do with the most valuable ship in the harbor. September 1939. Pier 88, Manhattan. The SS Normandie sits motionless at her berth, engines cold, passengers gone. Beside her, the Queen Mary has also taken refuge. Two titans of the Atlantic, side by side, waiting out a war neither can escape. Captain Hervé Lewede commands a skeleton crew of French sailors who maintain the ship's boilers, keep her machinery operational, and run the elaborate firewatch system that has protected her since launch. They understand every valve, every pump, every compartment. They know exactly how to respond if anything goes wrong. For now, Normandy remains French property under international law. Then France falls. May 1940, Germany invades. The French army collapses in 6 weeks. The Vichy puppet government takes power, collaborating openly with Hitler. Suddenly, the most magnificent ocean liner in the world belongs to a regime allied with Nazi Germany. The United States acts immediately. On May 15, 1940, the Treasury Department dispatches 150 Coast Guardsmen to board Normandy at Pier 88. Their official mission: defend against possible sabotage. Their practical role: observation. They watch while the French crew continues maintaining the vessel. The firewatch system, decades of maritime experience encoded in precise procedures, remains under French control. Normandy exists in legal limbo, technically Vichy property, practically an American hostage. This arrangement holds for 19 months. The French crew keeps the ship alive, the Coast Guard keeps watch, and the world waits. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. 5 days later, on December 12th, the Coast Guard removes Captain Lewede and his entire crew from the vessel. America seizes Normandy under the right of angary, a legal doctrine permitting wartime seizure of neutral or enemy ships. The French sailors, who understood every system, who maintained the firewatch procedures, who knew how to operate machinery no American had ever touched, gone. Escorted off the ship, replaced by American sailors inheriting equipment they've never trained on aboard a vessel they don't understand. The elaborate firewatch system, the sophisticated network of alarms and pumps and procedures that kept Normandy safe for 7 years of Atlantic crossings, is abandoned within days. Roosevelt's administration debates what to do with the prize. Some officials advocate converting her to an aircraft carrier. A November 1941 Time magazine article has already explained how Normandy's design makes such conversion feasible. Others want a troopship. The troopship faction wins. The Navy rechristens her USS Lafayette, honoring the Marquis de Lafayette, the French general who helped America win its independence. On December 27, 1941, a contract is awarded to Robbins Dry Dock and Repair Company for the conversion. The initial schedule is ambitious beyond reason. Complete the transformation by January 31, 1942. 35 days to convert a luxury liner into military transport. Workers swarm aboard immediately. They strip the Art Deco masterpieces with industrial efficiency. Lalique's crystal columns come down. Dunan's lacquer panels are removed. Dupas's glass murals go into storage. The soul of the ship is torn out piece by piece, but at least the treasures are being preserved. The goal: transform Normandy into a vessel capable of carrying 15,000 to 18,000 troops per crossing, a floating barracks for the largest ship afloat. The schedule is fantasy. Everyone knows it. The ship is too complex, too enormous, too unfamiliar to the conversion crews. Captain Robert G. Coleman arrives on January 31st as prospective commanding officer with a skeleton engineering crew of 458 men. They're learning the vessel as they work on it. By February 6, 1942, reality sets in. The conversion crew request a 2-week delay. The work cannot possibly be completed on the original timeline. The February 14th sailing date is impossible. The request is denied. Workers rush frantically. Safety procedures are ignored. The ship's fire protection system has been disconnected for the conversion. No replacement system is installed. Life vests stuffed with kapok, one of the most flammable materials in existence, are stacked haphazardly throughout workspaces. Welding torches operate feet away from combustible materials. No one stops to ask whether this is dangerous. No one has time. 3 days remain. On February 9th, 1942, a welder named Clement Derrick will light his torch in a former first-class lounge, and the most magnificent ship ever built will begin to die. February 9th, 1942, 2:30 in the afternoon, a winter Monday in Manhattan. 3,000 workers crowd the decks and compartments of the USS Lafayette, racing to meet an impossible deadline. The former first-class Grand Saloon, once the most magnificent room afloat, has been stripped to bare metal framework. Gone are Lalicque's crystal pillars. Gone are the towering glass columns that earned her the nickname Ship of Light. Workers are removing the final metal stanchions that once supported those vanished masterpieces. Welder Clement Derrick lights his acetylene torch. He's cutting through steel fixtures, routine work on a ship that's been gutted for weeks. Nearby, bales of life vests sit stacked in careless piles. They're filled with kapok, a natural fiber used in 1930s flotation devices. Kapok is extraordinarily buoyant. It's also extraordinarily flammable. A single spark arcs from Derrick's torch. It lands on the life vests. They ignite instantly, flames leaping from bale to bale. The fire races to varnished mahogany paneling that hasn't yet been removed. Within seconds, the Grand Saloon is ablaze. Workers scramble. Shouts echo through corridors. 3,000 men must evacuate before any organized firefighting can begin. The ship becomes a chaos of bodies rushing toward gangways, toward exits, toward safety. 12 minutes pass before anyone calls the New York Fire Department. 12 minutes. The ship's internal fire protection system, the sophisticated network of alarms, pumps, and suppression equipment that kept Normandy safe for 7 years of Atlantic crossings, has been disconnected for the conversion. Not replaced, not operational. The internal pumps are disabled. The fire alarms have been removed. The telephones have been dismantled. The ship that once had the most advanced firewatch procedures in the merchant marine is now completely defenseless. When New York firefighters finally arrive, they face an immediate problem. Their hose couplings are American standard. Normandy's fire hydrant connections are metric French standard. They don't fit. Firefighters cannot connect directly to the ship's internal systems. They must spray water from the outside, aiming streams through portholes and open hatches, hoping to reach flames they cannot see. The fire spreads unopposed. Varnish feeds it. Wood panels fuel it. Decades of accumulated combustibles throughout the workspaces give it everything it needs. Black smoke billows from the superstructure, visible across Manhattan. Fireboats arrive from the harbor. Firefighter, John J. Harvey, others. They position themselves along the port side, the seaward side, away from the pier, and begin pumping thousands of gallons onto the blaze. Land-based fire companies attack from the starboard side, connected to the pier. But here is where the mathematics of disaster begin. The fireboats pump more water. They have more capacity, more pressure, more volume. Water pours onto the port side of the ship in quantities far exceeding what's hitting the starboard side, and the water isn't draining. It's flooding into compartments, flowing to lower decks, accumulating on one side faster than the other. By late afternoon, Lafayette develops a noticeable list to port. She's leaning toward the harbor, away from the pier. Firefighters see it. Some grow alarmed. But the blaze is still raging. Flames still pour from hatches. Smoke still chokes the Manhattan sky. What choice do they have? They keep pumping. Across the city, Vladimir Yorkovich sees the smoke rising from Pier 88. He rushes to the waterfront, pushes through gathering crowds, reaches the police barricades. He identifies himself. He designed this ship. He knows every valve, every compartment, every system. He offers his expertise. He has a plan. Enter the vessel. Locate the main seacocks. Open them. Flood the lower decks deliberately. The ship will settle a few feet to the bottom of the slip. The water here is shallow enough, but she'll settle upright. Stabilized on the harbor floor, firefighters can pump water into burning areas without any risk of capsizing. It's brilliant. It's practical. It's their only chance to save the ship. Yorkovich pleads with authorities. Let him aboard. He can do this. He knows how. Rear Admiral Adolphus Andrews, commander of the 3rd Naval District, refuses. The Navy will handle this situation. A Russian civilian, even the ship's designer, will not be allowed onto a United States military vessel during an emergency. Protocol defeats expertise. Yorkovich stands behind police lines, watching helplessly as his masterpiece burns. Between 5:45 and 6 p.m., authorities declare the fire under control. Operations begin winding down, but the damage is already done. Water continues entering through submerged openings on the port side. Efforts to counter-flood the starboard side fail. The list increases steadily through the evening. 75 degrees, 77, 79. Shortly after midnight, Admiral Andrews orders Lafayette abandoned. Firefighting crews retreat to the pier. The ship continues rolling, slowly, inexorably, toward the dark water of the Hudson. At 2:45 a.m. on February 10, 1942, the SS Normandie, USS Lafayette, capsizes completely. 1,029 feet of floating palace crashes onto her port side and settles into the frozen mud at an angle of 80 degrees. One man is dead, and the greatest ocean liner ever built is gone. 2:45 a.m., February 10, 1942. The moment arrives without warning. Heavy mooring lines snap like rifle shots. The sound echoes across the water, sharp and final. Fireboat firefighter is still pressed against Lafayette's midship hull, her crew keeping watch on smoldering hotspots. They hear the lines part. They race outside. The port rail of the largest ocean liner in the world is rolling toward them. 1,029 feet of steel coming down. Firefighters' crew scrambles to their stations. Engines roar to life. The John J. Harvey, positioned nearby, joins the desperate escape. Both vessels claw away from the capsizing giant, racing against physics, against gravity, against 80,000 tons of ship falling sideways into the Hudson River. They clear with seconds to spare. Lafayette crashes onto her port side, nearly crushing both fireboats beneath her hull. The impact sends waves surging across the slip, slamming against Pier 88, washing over the frozen waterfront. The three massive funnels, once pointing proudly skyward, now aim sideways toward Manhattan. The ship settles at an angle of approximately 80 degrees, half submerged in the frozen mud of the harbor floor. And then silence. The fires are finally out, extinguished not by firefighting, but by submersion. What water pumped from hoses couldn't accomplish, the Hudson River completes in an instant. When dawn breaks over Manhattan, New Yorkers witness the unthinkable. The largest passenger ship ever built lies on her side in the harbor, smoke still rising from the wreck, ice already forming on her exposed hull. Photographers capture the image from every angle. Newspapers worldwide run it on front pages. The ship of light, the pride of France, the vessel that carried Marlene Dietrich and Ernest Hemingway across the Atlantic at 30 knots, capsized in the mud like a discarded toy. Admiral Andrews, recognizing that his decisions contributed directly to the catastrophe, bars all journalists from witnessing the actual moment of capsize. He wants to suppress the story. It's far too late. The devastation is impossible to hide. The casualties are tallied. 1 man dead. Frank Trent Acosta, 36 years old, from Brooklyn. A Firewatch member, trapped somewhere in the chaos, unable to escape as the ship rolled. 94 Coast Guard and Navy sailors are treated for injuries, burns, smoke inhalation, exposure. 38 New York firefighters injured. 153 civilian workers hurt. Total, 286 casualties from an event that should never have occurred. If the life vests had been moved away from the welding area, if the fire protection system had remained operational, if Yorkevich had been allowed aboard to open the seacocks, if anyone coordinating the firefighting had understood basic naval architecture well enough to balance the water distribution, if anyone had been in charge, if America is at war. Paranoia runs high. German U-boats have sunk 120 American merchant ships in the 3 months since Pearl Harbor. The possibility of Axis saboteurs operating on American soil terrifies the public, and now the largest ship in New York Harbor has burned and capsized under mysterious circumstances. Rumors explode. The Nazis did this. Fifth columnists infiltrated the waterfront. German agents set the fire. The mob tells a different story. Meyer Lansky and Charles Lucky Luciano later claim that Albert Mad Hatter Anastasia ordered the fire. Deliberate sabotage designed to create a crisis. Anastasia's brother Anthony controlled the Brooklyn Longshoremen's Union, giving him access to the waterfront. The alleged scheme: burn the ship, let the government blame German saboteurs, then offer mob assistance securing the docks in exchange for Luciano's release from prison. The theory has never been definitively proven, but the fire sets something in motion. Within weeks, naval intelligence approaches organized crime figures for help protecting the waterfront. The secret partnership becomes known as Operation Underworld. Luciano's sentence will be commuted in 1946. He'll be deported to Italy, forbidden ever to return to America. Whether the mob burned Lafayette intentionally or simply exploited an accident, the fire changes everything. Congress investigates. The official findings are damning. No sabotage. The fire was entirely accidental, caused by multiple overlapping failures, lack of command structure, rules violations, poor conversion planning, lack of coordination between workers aboard the vessel, and, in the investigation's most memorable phrase, general carelessness. The fire protection system was disabled without replacement. Life vests were stored next to welding operations. No single authority coordinated the firefighting effort. No one monitored the ship's stability as water accumulated. the greatest maritime disaster in New York Harbor since the General Slocum tragedy of 1904 was caused by bureaucratic negligence, schedule pressure, and breathtaking incompetence. The wreck sits in the mud. America has lost a potential troopship capable of carrying 15,000 soldiers per crossing. In wartime, that capacity is irreplaceable. The Navy faces a decision: abandon the ship or attempt salvage. They will try to save her. They will spend 17 months and millions of dollars righting her hull. They will succeed. And then they will discover that saving the ship was never the same as bringing her back to life. The problem is unprecedented. The solution will have to be invented. Lafayette lies at an angle of nearly 80 degrees, half submerged, in what salvage engineers describe as soup-like mud. A toxic slurry composed largely of decades of sewage deposits from the Hudson River. More than 300 portholes on the submerged port side are open. 16 large cargo ports gape wide. Water and sludge have flooded into every available compartment, filling some to depths of 20 feet. The ship was built for luxury, not survival. Lightweight bulkheads designed for passenger privacy now serve as makeshift decks, and they're too flimsy to support significant weight. Hundreds of ventilation ducts pierce walls and floors throughout the vessel, making watertight integrity nearly impossible to achieve. The bow has swung away from Pier 88 during the capsizing. The stern projects beneath the pier itself, and approximately 1/3 of the way back from the bow, the hull rests on a rock ledge that threatens catastrophic damage if the ship shifts during salvage. Beneath the waterline, the wreckage of wooden scaffolding that hung along the ship's side during conversion now lies tangled with the hull. Splintered timbers protrude through open ports. The mud contains everything: debris, sewage, remnants of the conversion work, fragments of what was once the most beautiful ship afloat. The Navy debates options. Abandon her? Impossible. Lafayette represents 1,029 feet of potential troopship capacity at a time when every vessel matters. Leave her blocking Pier 88? Unacceptable. The berth is needed for other ships. The only viable option is salvage. In wartime, in one of the world's busiest harbors, using technology that will seem primitive within decades. The Navy will attempt history's most expensive maritime salvage operation. The divers go in first. Visibility underwater is zero. Absolute blackness. The men work entirely by touch, navigating through sludge so thick they cannot see their own hands. They must locate and seal those 300 open portholes, close the cargo ports, patch every opening on the submerged side before pumping can begin. They cut with acetylene torches they cannot see, following the contours of steel by feel alone. They attach hoisting lines to debris that must be removed, guiding the cables into position without visual reference. They communicate through tugs on safety lines, one pull for this or two pulls for that. The work is exhausting, dangerous, and agonizingly slow. Inside the ship, the salvage plan requires construction of wooden bulkheads to create watertight compartments. Workers build barriers using tongue-and-groove timber construction, sealing the joints to the metal hull with cement poured underwater. Each barrier must hold against the pressure of water being pumped out. Each seal must be perfect. A single failure could flood compartments already cleared, setting the operation back weeks. Months pass. February 1942 becomes spring, then summer, then fall. The first winter arrives. Workers rotate through shifts in the foul water. 20 feet of sewage-saturated mud in some compartments. The cold, the stench, the endless grinding labor of making a capsized ocean liner watertight, one patch at a time. By summer 1943, the preparatory work is finally complete. On August 4th, 17 months after the fire, final pumping operations begin. Multiple pumps work simultaneously to remove accumulated water and silt from the hull. Jets of high-pressure water are directed at the exterior to break the suction holding the ship in the mud. The ruined vessel begins to stir, but new problems emerge immediately. The outboard bulkhead of the former promenade deck compartments lies buried under feet of mud on the submerged side. If the hull rises and that plating peels away under the mud's weight, it could tear off half the ship's side. Divers scramble to attach wire stays to the buried bulkhead, securing it to the promenade deck above. 15 stays are installed on August 5th alone. Other divers work frantically to remove mud from the threatened plating using water and compressed air jets. August 6th, 9:30 a.m. The ship is observed rolling slightly. It's working. The pumping continues. The hull rises. When Lafayette reaches a 45-degree angle, she is nudged to the center of the slip between piers 88 and 90, positioning her for the final righting process. More pumping, more weighting, more incremental progress as 80,000 tons of steel slowly, painfully returns to vertical. August 7th, 1943, 17 months and 19 days after the fire, USS Lafayette completes her return to upright position. The salvage has succeeded. The cost is staggering. Approximately $5 million, equivalent to $91 million in today's currency. At the time, the most expensive maritime salvage operation in history. The record will stand until the Costa Concordia recovery in 2014. Lafayette is stripped of her remaining superstructure, reclassified as aircraft, and transport ferry APV-4, and placed in dry dock in October 1943. For the first time since the fire, engineers can properly inspect her hull. The findings are devastating. Extensive damage from the fire itself, extensive damage from the capsizing, extensive damage from 17 months submerged in corrosive harbor sludge, extensive damage from the salvage operation. The righting process stressed plates and seams that were never designed for such forces. The machinery, once the most powerful turboelectric propulsion system ever installed in a passenger ship, has deteriorated beyond reasonable repair. The Navy runs the numbers. The cost of restoring Lafayette to operational condition is prohibitive. The war demands manpower and resources for projects with better odds of success. The ship has been saved, but she cannot sail. Vladimir Yurkevich refuses to accept defeat. The salvage has succeeded. Lafayette floats upright again. Her hull, his hull, the revolutionary design that made her the fastest ocean liner afloat, remains structurally intact despite everything. Yes, there's damage. Yes, the machinery has deteriorated, but the fundamental vessel still exists, and Yurkevich believes she can be saved. He draws up proposals, plan after plan, restoration concepts, alternative configurations. His most detailed scheme: cut the ship down, reduce her to more manageable dimensions, restore her as a mid-sized liner. The revolutionary hull design would still function. The turbo-electric propulsion could be rebuilt. She wouldn't be the Normandie anymore, but she would sail. He approaches the French line. They show no interest. The war has devastated their fleet. They're focused on survival, not restoration of a damaged vessel sitting in an American harbor. He approaches the Navy. They've already run the numbers. The cost is prohibitive. The manpower is needed elsewhere. They decline. Yorkovich has spent 14 years connected to this ship. From the sketches in his refugee apartment, through the triumph of the maiden voyage to the nightmare at Pier 88. He watched her burn. He begged to save her and was refused. He has witnessed the agonizing salvage operation, the slow return to upright position, the inspection that revealed the extent of the damage. He cannot let go, but no one is listening. The same institutional deafness that refused his expertise on the night of the fire now refuses his expertise on how to resurrect her. The Navy has made its decision. Lafayette will not sail again. The hulk remains in Navy custody through the remainder of the war. She sits at her berth, stripped of superstructure, a ghost of what she was, while the conflict that claimed her rages across Europe and the Pacific. Attempts continue to find a buyer willing to undertake restoration. There are none. The numbers don't work. The damage is too extensive. The cost is too high. October 11th, 1945. Lafayette is stricken from the Naval Vessel Register. She is no longer a commissioned vessel. She is surplus property awaiting disposal. September 8th, 1946. President Harry Truman signs an executive order authorizing her disposal. October 3rd, 1946. USS Lafayette is sold to Lipset, Incorporated, a New York salvage company. The purchase price, $161,680. The ship that cost $60 million to build. The ship that required $5 million to salvage. The ship designed by a genius, decorated by Lalique and Dunand and Dupin, celebrated as the greatest ocean liner ever constructed. Sold for scrap at less than 0.3% of her original cost. Before the cutting begins, Normandie's stored artifacts go to auction. The Art Deco treasures that made her famous are dispersed across the world. Jean Dupin's massive glass murals from the Grand Salon, the panels that once defined the most elegant room afloat, are sold separately, broken into individual pieces. One complete corner section eventually reaches the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It hangs there today, a fragment of glory preserved behind museum glass, stripped of context, separated from the ship that gave it meaning. The 10 bronze dining room door medallions by Raymond Subis find an unexpected home. Our Lady of Lebanon Maronite Cathedral in Brooklyn purchases them. They're installed as exterior doors to the church, where they remain to this day. Parishioners pass through artwork that once admitted first-class passengers to dinners beneath Lalique crystal. Some of the crystal survives. Fragments of the 24,000 pieces Lalique created for the ship appear at auction over the decades. Custom furniture surfaces in hotels and private collections. Original artwork, sculptures, decorative panels, scattered across continents, sold to collectors who appreciate Art Deco without necessarily understanding what the Normandie represented. Each piece is a shard of the dream. Preserved but homeless, October 1946. Lafayette is towed to Port Newark, New Jersey. Lipset's name is painted on her rusting flanks. Workers begin the dismantling. The revolutionary hull that allowed 160,000 horsepower to match rivals needing 212,000. The design that changed naval architecture forever is cut apart for scrap metal. The steel that crossed the Atlantic 139 times is stacked for smelting. The work takes 2 years. Section by section, the largest ocean liner ever built, disappears into furnaces. October 6, 1947. The final skeletal element is craned onto shore at Port Newark. By December 31st, 1948, the scrapping is complete. She is gone. The destruction is said to be understandably heartbreaking to Yorkovich. He has watched his masterpiece burn, capsize, rot in harbor mud, and finally dissolve into raw material destined to become something else. Cars, perhaps, refrigerators, steel beams for office buildings, the atoms that once formed the ship of light now scattered anonymously across America. He continues working. His design bureau operates. He consults for the U.S. Maritime Administration, contributes to warship designs during the war, lectures on naval architecture at the University of Michigan and MIT. His hull concepts become industry standard. The bulbous bow he pioneered, rejected by British shipbuilders in the 1920s as too radical, is now ubiquitous on large vessels worldwide. He has revolutionized his field, but he never designs another ocean liner. How could he? The Normandie wasn't just a ship. She was proof that genius could triumph over circumstance, that a refugee who once swept floors at a Renault factory could create something the world had never seen. And then he watched bureaucrats, schedule pressure, and carelessness destroy it. Vladimir Yorkovich dies in December 1964 in New York. He is 79 years old. His obituaries mention the Normandie. They always mention the Normandie. There's another man who watched the fire at Pier 88 with horror. His name is William Francis Gibbs. He's America's greatest naval architect, and the destruction of the Normandie haunts him. When Gibbs designs his masterpiece, the SS United States, launched in 1952, he makes one thing absolutely certain. She will not burn. Aluminum, steel, glass, no wood anywhere aboard, no flammable materials of any kind. Even the piano is fireproof. Normandie's death shapes the future of ocean liner design. Her ghost writes the specifications for every major passenger ship that follows. The lesson is learned. But the cost of that lesson was the most beautiful vessel ever to cross the Atlantic. The fire that destroyed the SS Normandie was not a tragedy of fate. It was a tragedy of choice. Every failure that led to her destruction was preventable. Every mistake was avoidable. And every lesson written in her ashes had been learned before, ignored, and would be learned again. Start with the schedule. The original conversion deadline was January 31st, 1942. 35 days to transform the largest luxury liner in the world into a military troopship. The timeline was fantasy. Everyone involved knew it. The ship was too complex, too enormous, too unfamiliar to the conversion crews. When workers requested a 2-week extension on February 6th, acknowledging that the February 14th sailing date was impossible, the request was denied. In wartime, schedules become tyrannical. Every day a troopship sits in port is a day soldiers aren't crossing the Atlantic. Every delay feels like betrayal of men who might die waiting for transport. The pressure to move faster, cut corners, skip steps, it's relentless, and it's lethal. So workers rushed. Life vests were stored wherever there was space, including next to welding operations. Fire protection systems were disconnected for the conversion with no replacement installed. Procedures that existed specifically to prevent catastrophe were ignored because procedures take time. The deadline mattered more than the ship. The schedule became more important than safety. This pattern repeats across history. Apollo 1, the Space Shuttle Challenger, Deepwater Horizon, Chernobyl. The details differ, but the structure is identical. Schedule pressure compresses safety margins until they vanish. Someone says we can make the deadline if we skip this step. Someone else approves it. And then the system fails in exactly the way the skipped step was designed to prevent. Normandy had one of the most sophisticated fire protection systems in the merchant marine. It kept her safe for 7 years of Atlantic crossings, through storms, through engine room emergencies, through every hazard the ocean could produce. The system was disconnected for the conversion, not replaced, not operational. When Clement Derrick's Spark landed on the Kapok life vests, the ship had no defense. The suppression equipment that would have contained the fire in minutes sat in pieces, waiting for reinstallation that never came. Now consider the expertise vacuum. When the Coast Guard removed Captain Lewede and his French crew on December 12, 1941, they removed decades of institutional knowledge. Those sailors understood every system aboard Normandy. They maintained the firewatch procedures, operated the pump systems, knew the layout of every compartment. They could respond to emergencies because they understood the vessel intimately. American sailors inherited machinery they'd never operated aboard a ship they didn't understand. The sophisticated fire protection system worked because French sailors knew how to use it. In American hands, disconnected and abandoned, it became useless metal. The knowledge walked off the gangway with the French crew, and no one thought to capture it before they left. Yorkovich knew the ship better than anyone alive. He designed her hull. He understood her systems. He was present at Pier 88 during the fire, watching from behind police barricades, begging authorities to let him aboard. He had a plan that could have saved her, flooding the lower decks deliberately through the seacocks, settling the ship on the harbour floor in an upright position, eliminating the capsizing risk entirely. Admiral Andrews refused. Protocol demanded that civilians not be allowed aboard a military vessel during an emergency. Bureaucratic hierarchy defeated practical expertise. The Navy chose procedure over solution, and the ship died because of it. Now, examine the water. Basic naval architecture teaches that a vessel floating freely will capsize if water floods one side faster than the other. This is not advanced theory. This is fundamental. Fireboats positioned along the port side pumped water onto the blaze with enormous capacity and pressure. Land-based companies attacked from the starboard side with less volume. The imbalance was obvious. The water wasn't draining. It was accumulating in compartments, flowing to lower decks, collecting asymmetrically. The list was visible by late afternoon. It worsened through the evening. Anyone with basic understanding of ship stability could see what was happening. Yorkovich's solution, deliberate controlled flooding to settle the ship on the bottom, was exactly right. With Lafayette stabilized upright on the shallow harbor floor, firefighters could have continued operations indefinitely without capsizing risk. Instead, they kept pumping. The ship kept leaning. At 2:45 a.m., physics completed what carelessness began. The congressional investigation found lack of command structure among the primary causes. No single authority coordinated the firefighting effort. No one monitored the ship's stability as water accumulated. Land-based companies and fireboats operated independently, without communication, without unified leadership. No one was in charge. Organizations without clear authority structures make decisions by accident. Responsibility diffuses until accountability disappears. Someone should have been tracking the water distribution. Someone should have been calculating the changing center of gravity. Someone should have been commanding the operation with full awareness of the naval architecture implications. Instead, everyone fought the fire and no one saved the ship. Consider what was lost. USS Lafayette as a troopship could have carried 15,000 to 18,000 soldiers per crossing. At peak operation, Queen Mary, successfully converted to troopship duty, transported over 16,000 troops in a single voyage. Lafayette's size and speed would have made her equally valuable. Assuming 10 round-trip crossings per year, she could have transported 150,000 to 180,000 soldiers annually. Over 3 years of war, that's nearly 500,000 troops. Instead, those soldiers sailed on slower, smaller, more vulnerable ships. Some took weeks longer to reach Europe. Some never arrived at all. U-boats sank troopships throughout the war. The capacity lost when Normandy burned was irreplaceable. Men died because a welder's spark landed on life vests that should never have been stored there. Men died because the fire protection system was disconnected. Men died because no one asked the Russian émigré at the barricade if he might know something useful. The disaster wasn't caused by enemy action. It wasn't caused by mechanical failure. It wasn't caused by unforeseeable circumstances. It was caused by schedule pressure, defeating safety protocols, by bureaucratic hierarchy blocking common sense expertise, by institutional arrogance, assuming that rank equals knowledge. Pier 88 still exists. It's now the Manhattan Cruise Terminal. Modern cruise ships dock where Normandy once towered over the waterfront. Tourists in casual clothes board vessels bound for Caribbean vacations on the same pier where aristocrats once ascended gangways in evening dress. Nothing marks the spot. No plaque. No memorial. No acknowledgement that 83 years ago, the greatest ocean liner ever built caught fire and capsized right here, in this water, at this berth. But the lessons of that February afternoon remain, waiting to be remembered or repeated. Port Newark, New Jersey. Autumn 1947. The last skeletal element of what was once the SS Normandie is craned from a barge onto shore. Workers guide the steel fragment toward a smelting furnace. It joins the rest of her, 1,029 feet of floating palace reduced to raw material, waiting to become something else. Cars, maybe. Appliances. I-beams for office buildings. The furnace takes what's left. And then she's gone. Not gradually, not gracefully. Gone. The most magnificent ocean liner ever built. The fastest turbo-electric passenger ship in history. The vessel that carried Marlene Dietrich and Ernest Hemingway across the Atlantic at 30 knots beneath ceilings of Lalique crystal. Melted down for scrap metal 5 years after a welder's spark ended her life. Vladimir Yurkevich outlived his creation by 18 years. He kept working, kept designing, kept consulting for the U.S. Maritime Administration. His hull concepts became industry standard. Every modern cruise ship owes something to his bulbous bow, his hydrodynamic principles, his revolutionary understanding of how a vessel should move through water. But he never designed another ocean liner. He couldn't. The Normandie wasn't just a ship to him. It was proof that genius could triumph over circumstance, that a refugee who once swept floors at a Renault factory could create something the world had never seen. And then he watched bureaucrats destroy it. The fire has been analyzed for decades. Congressional investigation, naval review, Historical reconstruction. The causes are clear. Lesson 1. Expertise ignored is expertise wasted. Yorkovich stood at the police barricades on February 9th, 1942, offering to save his ship. He knew the seacocks. He knew the ballast systems. He knew exactly how to settle the hull on the harbour floor and prevent the capsizing. Admiral Andrews refused. Protocol mattered more than solution. The Navy would handle this, and the Navy didn't understand what it was handling. This pattern repeats across history. The expert in the room dismissed. The person who built the system ignored when the system fails. Institutional hierarchies assume that rank equals knowledge. They don't. Sometimes the Russian émigré at the barricade knows more than the admiral in the command post. Sometimes the person who designed the machine understands it better than the person who requisitioned it. When you're facing disaster, ego is a luxury you cannot afford. Lesson 2. Speed kills when safety follows. 35 days to convert a luxury liner into a troopship. Everyone knew the timeline was impossible. Workers rushed anyway. Life vests stored next to welding operations. Fire protection systems disconnected without replacement. Procedures ignored because procedures take time. The February 14th sailing date was a fantasy that became a fatality. Every catastrophe teaches the same lesson. Apollo 1, Challenger, Deepwater Horizon, Chernobyl. The pattern is always identical. Schedule pressure compresses safety margins until they disappear. Someone says, "We can make the deadline if we skip this step." Someone else approves it, and then the system fails in exactly the way the skipped step was designed to prevent. Normandy had a sophisticated fire protection system. It had kept her safe for 7 years of Atlantic crossings. It was disconnected for the conversion, not replaced, not operational. When the spark hit the kapok life vests, the ship had no defense. The system that would have suppressed the fire in minutes was sitting in pieces, waiting for reinstallation that never came. The deadline mattered more than the defense. Lesson 3. When no one is in charge, everyone fails. The congressional investigation found lack of command structure among the causes. Land-based fire companies attacked from one side. Fireboats attacked from the other. No one coordinated. No one monitored the ship's stability. No one noticed or cared that water was accumulating faster on one side than the other. The list developed throughout the afternoon. It worsened through the evening. At 2:45 a.m., the inevitable happened. Organizations without clear authority structures make decisions by accident. When responsibility is diffused, accountability disappears. Someone should have been tracking the water. Someone should have been calculating the ship's center of gravity. Someone should have been in command. Instead, everyone fought the fire and no one saved the ship. What happened afterward? The salvage succeeded. 17 months, $5 million, and Lafayette was upright again. But the hull was too damaged, the machinery too deteriorated, the cost of restoration too high. The Navy abandoned her. She sat in custody until the war ended. Then Truman signed the order. Lipset Incorporated bought her for $161,680, and she went to the furnaces. The artifacts survived in pieces. One of Jean Dupas' Grand Salon murals hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Raymond Subes's bronze dining room medallions serve as doors at Our Lady of Lebanon Cathedral in Brooklyn. Lalique crystal fragments appear at auction. Custom furniture surfaces in hotels. Each piece is a shard of the dream. scattered across continents, stripped of context. Pier 88 is now the Manhattan Cruise Terminal. Modern cruise ships dock where Normandie once towered. Passengers in flip-flops walk gangways where Cary Grant once strolled in white dinner jackets. There is no memorial, no plaque, no acknowledgement that on this exact spot, the greatest maritime fire in New York Harbor's modern history destroyed one of humanity's most extraordinary achievements. The SS United States entered service in 1952. Her designer, William Francis Gibbs, had been haunted by the Normandy fire. He made his ship fireproof: aluminum, steel, glass, no wood anywhere, no flammable materials. The United States captured the blue riband on her maiden voyage and held it forever. She remains the fastest ocean liner ever built, and she has never caught fire. That's the legacy. Normandie's death shaped the future of naval architecture. Her failure became a lesson encoded in steel and glass and aluminum. The ships that followed were safer because she burned. But she shouldn't have burned. She should have crossed the Atlantic as USS Lafayette, carrying 15,000 soldiers per voyage to fight Hitler. She should have survived the war and returned to CGT, resumed service as the Normandie carried a new generation of celebrities and aristocrats beneath her Lalique columns. She should have sailed until the jet age made ocean liners obsolete, then retired gracefully to a maritime museum where generations could walk her decks and marvel at what French civilization produced at the height of its ambition. Instead, she lies in fragments, car bodies and refrigerators and structural beams scattered across America, unrecognizable, anonymous. And the lessons of that February afternoon fade and resurface, fade and resurface across 8 decades of preventable catastrophe. We ignore expertise. We sacrifice safety to speed. We let schedules become more important than systems. We assume the admiral knows more than the engineer. We repeat the same failures in different industries with different victims across different eras. Yorkovich stood at the barricade begging to save his ship. They told him no, and the greatest ocean liner ever built burned, capsized, and disappeared into furnaces because someone stored life vests next to a blowtorch and no one was in charge, and nobody asked the man who built her what to do. Welcome to Pier 88, where the SS Normandie was built to dazzle, sailed to triumph, and died in fire and incompetence 83 years ago. Subscribe, because the next story might be even harder to believe, and history has a way of repeating its cruelest lessons. Don't miss it.